Morning, everyone. I figured today I would spend a little time talking about jobs and employment. I was talking to a fellow in a chat, like a Discord chat. Discord is software, discordapp.com/download. I was first introduced to Discord via a bunch of gamer friends of mine, ended up talking with some people on a philosophy bulletin board, and I was like, I really don't like the bulletin board format, so let's go and do, I'd like to do a chat somewhere, and they're like, hey, we have one already set up in Discord. I'm like, okay. I don't really like Discord, but that's not really the topic of this video. I should do one on like why what I prefer to Discord for the same things, but yeah, there was a guy who posted, and these guys come from a lot of backgrounds, and there are a couple of women in there as well, but he was asking, how do I know if my employer values me? And I thought that was a really good question. I think the best, I think there are a lot of different ways that a person can assess the value, and so I want to get into a few of those because I've been in the job market for a long time, and I think I have some good answers to these things. But I don't know, maybe you'll disagree. I think it's a good topic of discussion, and I'd love to hear more from my viewers. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle there is Mark Noble, MarkNoble. Obviously, if you're on this channel, you'll be able to see how it's spelled in your username, in my username, I guess, for the channel. But yeah, and also there's marknoble.com, which is really more of a demo site that I keep up and running and try different things, but it does have a contact section in case anyone's interested in reaching out and asking questions in a forum that's a little more private than YouTube comments. So, which I personally, I find YouTube comments kind of hard to read. So anyway, we were talking with this fellow. Oh, there's a really nice train over there. I'm gonna, it's like some BNSF
recording will now start.
And Canadian National Power. Oh, yay, gridlock already. So yeah, he was asking about how to know if your employer values you, and we were talking a little bit as a group about it, and we felt that, it's a lot of times it's kind of hard to find out. I mean, obviously an employer keeps you employed, but one thing that I think is a misconception is that, for example, someone might do some hourly work, and let's say they get paid $100 an hour to do that. But then they go and they do salary work, and it's exactly the same job, exactly the same work, to them. Let's say they're hired as a programmer or whatever, and I don't think this guy was. I think this guy, he was more of an administrator of some computer systems, and he also felt that he was the only one at work who did his critical job, so he felt kind of indispensable. And so we all reminded him that you're not indispensable. And this is evident anytime you see someone quit, or as I've had the unfortunate opportunity to experience twice in my career so far, sometimes coworkers die, and both of the coworkers in my case died in automobile accidents, which are pretty sudden. So they went from very senior administrative level positions to non-existing, and the teams didn't, I mean, there may have been, there were a lot of things where it would have been better if the team had their insight. What were you working on? What was your approach with this? What were you trying to do? But that wasn't an option, and so we just had to go and, when you're the administrators, other people can go in and gain access to your accounts and, find any notes you made, but pretty much it's just changing of the guard, and you get a new person in that role, and you know, in most cases it's a lot more seamless. You know, the team always has this initial, oh my gosh, how are we going to survive without so and so? But a year later, it's like, well, we made do. I mean, I haven't, you know, I'm sure there have been top people on products you use every day that were on their teams and that passed away, and they died, and the product went on. And in a lot of ways, to me, that's a way that you can provide a lot of value to your employer, is if you pass away or you are no longer on the project and it doesn't really affect the project at all because your stuff was freestanding enough that it didn't require a lot of your special knowledge, you know, to keep the plates spinning. You know, anyone could do it. So yeah, I mean, a lot of these people, you know, people tend to think that maybe they can look at their value, their price in the market, and so maybe they look at what they could get as a freelancer, and then they say, well, you know, I could be getting that same money myself. You know, the difference between a salaried rate and a freelance rate, and I don't know, I'm guessing, but I mean, what you can do is you can compare typical freelance rates for that type of work compared with typical salaries in your area, and get an idea for where it's kind of working out, as far as like what percentage of the freelance rate people who are paying a salary are doing. That'll give you an idea of like how much overhead, and then you can make a decision based on whether or not you think that overhead is of value to you. You know, I've worked in a couple of consulting companies. Currently I work as a salaried software engineer, but and I don't get paid as much on paper as if I were, you know, freelancing and you know, working for myself and stuff like that. But there's a lot of nonsense that I don't have to deal with, you know, from an HR standpoint. You know, I can just, you know, and it's up to you whether or not you think it's worthwhile to you to be in that position. If you are okay with dealing with it, there are a lot of advantages to being on your own. But when I was working in a consulting environment, what I found is that a lot of people that were higher ups, they didn't really know much about the industry or the technology. They may have been a former developer in a different on a different platform or whatever, and these organizations tend to put technical people up through the ranks, so it's probably better than a lot of industries with regard to technical understanding. But they just seem to do a lot of stuff that was, they really, it was like a conveyor belt. They were bringing people in at the low range salary wise, and I saw time and time again they would let top talent go in the higher salary range, and there wasn't really any explanation. I mean, it didn't seem to be work performance, and the people went on to have wonderful careers and stuff. It just seemed to be that they were looking for people who were you know, at a little below market what they were asking, and then they would gradually give them raises and promotions and stuff until they were at market, and then let them go. And you know, at the time when I saw that happening to a couple of people, I thought, well, you know, that's kind of crude, because here, you know, that you've got a guy who's, you know, he's trying to feed his, you know, wife and kids, and he's working on, you know, he's one of the top talents. He's giving a lot of presentations in the community, trying to help other people learn about the technology he works with, and there you are, just like, you know, firing them. And you know, when someone is a top talent like that, I mean, yeah, they can go get a job at McDonald's flipping burgers, but they're not realizing their full potential unless they are employed in the area of their expertise. And so, you know, sometimes it hurt to watch some of these guys looking for work for quite some time to find something that, you know, like several months, to find a place where their level was needed. I mean, when you're the big fish in a city, which I certainly am not technically, then a lot of times your only option is other cities if you lose your job. So so that was interesting, and that's something to keep in mind, is just, you know, you can't always rely entirely on your price, you know, on the market. You have to keep in mind your price relative to other things. You know, look at your salary, but then look at it relative to other salaried people, look at hourly relative to hourly. Don't just say, well, I think I'm worth this much, because what you have to do for your employer to remain valuable fundamentally is you have to help them be profitable, because if they're not profitable, then they're not going to have profits to spend on people to help them. And that's how a lot of businesses kind of wind down, is they just stop becoming profitable, and it's not they go out with a whimper instead of a bang. So I mean, one way I think is a really good way to see if you're considered valuable by your organization is just whether or not the feedback they give you. Do they tell you, hey, this is really good information you're giving us? What I like to do is I like to work on stuff. I like to research stuff I'm interested in my spare time, whether I'm at home or over lunch breaks and stuff like that. If I make a little list of things that I'd like to learn more about. For example, I was interested in the bot framework, so I went and this is a Microsoft technology, and there are similar technologies from other companies, but the Microsoft bot framework seemed really interesting to me, and so I went and did a bunch of tutorials over lunch break, and then I thought of a bot that I thought would be an attainable goal, and I built it out. And then as I built it out, it was really interesting how it worked and everything. So there weren't a lot of people in my community who'd built bots using the bot framework yet, so I ended up arranging for a tech talk at a local developer event. And then one of the things I wish I'd done differently is that maybe synchronized it a little better, because I ended up giving the talk several months after I built it, so I wasn't quite as fresh on it, even though I did brush up on it and try and prepare for it. It's sometimes you're not quite as fresh on some of your thoughts and opinions as when you're initially learning something. So I would have liked to have it right after that. But I'd look around your environment and look at your coworkers compared to you. Are they trying to learn new things, and then are they trying to get those new things adopted for better productivity in your workplace? And it doesn't matter where you work. You could work on a railroad, or you could work as a software engineer, or you could work as a surgeon. There are always opportunities there to improve performance and efficiency and recognize waste and try and get rid of that waste. So suggest those things and see what the feedback is. One of the things that's been perplexing to me in a number of jobs is that sometimes these suggestions, they're praised directly and openly, but then when you look at the actual results, like people say, oh wow, that's a great idea, let's look into implementing that on a wider basis, or I think the team will really benefit from this. Well, that's great. That's really encouraging feedback, but make note of that and maybe set a deadline, like 6 months, and see how much of what you suggested has actually gone into effect, and also look back on whether or not you still think it's a good idea, and like, does the company still need this? And that's one of the things that I've noticed, is that a lot of times there are things that everyone on the team says would be a really great thing to have, but then they go and they make all kinds of excuses as why it can't be done. Now keep in mind, there are lots of competitors and other businesses in similar industries that are out there doing these processes in most cases also. So it's not usually a case of technical feasibility, but a lot of times people within an organization will treat it like that. So I'd say look at it and recognize that there aren't enough resources to implement everyone's ideas every day, and there are priorities in the organization. But to the extent that your ideas help you achieve that work and get it done in a timely fashion and under budget, some of these ideas should be implemented if they're truly valuable to your employer. And so I had a situation at my last position where I was constantly putting forward ideas for new approaches, and that we could really gain efficiency, and people kept just dreaming up excuses why we couldn't do it. And I ended up leaving because, I mean, it's painful to be in an environment where everyone tells you what a great idea the things are, but they won't actually act on them. It's very telling. And fundamentally, it's an organization that's dysfunctional because the employees and the management are in denial. I mean, if they truly do recognize something that's a good idea, then they should, start doing it. It's like someone who recognizes that, well, it's not the same, because I'm referring to, I'll be talking about here smoking, which is an addiction. I don't think there's an addiction so much to doing things. Maybe there is. Maybe there's scientific research to show there's an addiction to doing things the way they've always been done. It seems like it's addictive because it's so widespread, and it seems so hard for companies to kick. But on the other hand, when it comes to my own stuff, when I pick up a new technology, it becomes a new tool in my toolkit, and suddenly a wide range of problems that I'd been facing become solvable. Now, I may not have time to solve them, but when I go and pick up something new that I think will be helpful, or if I notice an efficiency in my personal life, like, oh, I'm wasting a lot of time doing such and such, I could spend that time doing this, which I'd really like to achieve instead, then that makes a lot more sense. So to me, that's a really good way to tell whether or not you're valued. And the thing is, if you're in an environment, I heard, I was watching reading a Stefan Molyneux book. He has a bunch of free books at fdrurl.com/free, and I forget which book it was. It could have been Real-Time Relationships, or Universally Preferable Behavior, or On Truth, or maybe it was something else. But he was talking about how people, a lot of people think that if they go up against the big ideas of their culture and their government, for example, that they're going to be met with like a SWAT team or something like that, that they're going to come and they're going to make you conform. And history has shown time and again that while that does happen, it's mostly not the SWAT team, it's your peers. If you start getting out of the corral that society has put there, and the reasons for the corral may be good or they may be bad, they may be valid, they may be backed up with all kinds of evidence, they may be just backed up with the wisdom of the tribe, but you can usually see the results. If a lot of people have to compensate for people getting out of that corral, there may be good reasons for having it. But if you look at these corrals that are set up for society and by individuals within the society, making individual decisions over many years, it's in a way a kind of collective, even though it's actually made up by individuals. You start to see that these things are enforced by individuals and peers. So one of the things is that if you are in an environment where people are not, as functional as they could be, they're dysfunctional, they may start, they may react to people who have new ideas, who are especially functional, by trying to diminish, diminish the positive things that person is capable of. So if you have a really good idea and it's very productive, and a lot of other businesses in your community or in your field are doing that, or maybe no one is, and it gives you a huge opportunity, then that's one thing that you have to look at, is whether or not this idea is being waylaid and put aside because it represents because it is so effective. And if you are in an environment like that, which I think is extremely common, especially at the low end of the pay scale. But it's certainly possible all the way, to the very high reaches of, I would say, an employee-employer kind of relationship, kind of environment. That's a time when, if you stay where you are, you're not really living up to your full potential. And that's the thing that can be very difficult, because a lot of times, companies work very hard at retention and to make people feel comfortable. And that's fundamentally the reason why people are telling you that your ideas are good, if they are. They want you to stick around, and they'll tell you, I would love to do this, but I have these fires to put out first, and then after those fires we'll do this. Well, the problem is, in a dysfunctional environment that doesn't embrace and adapt to new ideas for efficiency, you're never out of fires. You're never going to be improving and improving processes. Every once in a while, processes will change. This is mostly for show, but you'll notice, and this is not, this is stuff that you can just set waypoints and then look back and see if this is true. But you'll notice that in organizations like this, while they may pick up a new technology or make a big show of a major change in efficiency, it's not something that challenges the overall operations of the organization in any meaningful way. It's essentially, you make the old product using the new technology, and you may gain some efficiencies, and that's always the promise, is that while we're starting from scratch and we're going to have an opportunity to do this right, we're going to re-engineer it, except it's due on a deadline. And I've seen it a bunch of times. The developers, they just go and they look at the old source code and they mimic it, and they struggle against trying to get the old technology to do something in the new framework, and you end up at the end with something that may even look a lot like the old thing, though usually they involve some designers or something, or just the different people involved make it look a little bit different. But it's usually not, a really good example of this would be, a good example of a look that really changed radically, and it didn't, and it was radical, I think, was when Microsoft went from Windows 7 to Windows 8. This is a radical departure, and I think it really did change the way that people work with their machines. And it was based in a lot of user feedback and research. They had a lot of data behind it showing why why those ways were beneficial. But when it went to the masses, they didn't like it. And so you look at Windows 10, and while there are some Windows 8 elements in it, it's much more of an intermediary step between Windows 7. Windows 10, I think, looks a lot more like Windows 7 than Windows 8 did, though there are some relics of Windows 8 hanging around in there. And you can make Windows 10 look very much like Windows 8, but there are a lot of key features like the charms bar that I really miss, and I'd like to see that come back. The thing is, though, that as long as they continue their feedback and science-based approach to things, I think they'll, if the Windows 8 approach really was the way forward, and I think there were many ways that it will be, then I think the next iteration of Windows will probably be more like that. And I think we've seen, there are similar lines of thought going on in the Apple design space and by Google as well. So anyway, back to the original topic. I think those are some things to consider for people who are looking to change work. I know a couple of people that are, I don't want to name names because they're, I don't want to affect their job search, but there are a lot of people that I'm seeing them floating resumes around, and maybe it's just the new year or whatever, but they're obviously asking these questions, and I don't know how they're going to answer them. And I'd love to hear in the comments how you have dealt with these issues, whether or not you're facing them now, whether or not you faced them in the past and how you've dealt with them. I'd love to hear a lot about that. But yeah, it's an interesting problem, and I hope that this little commute has given you something useful that maybe you hadn't thought of before to think about. And if it has, please subscribe. When I started out when I restarted vlogging, I think I had about 25 subscribers, and after I think about a week of it, I'm already up to like 55. Now, I don't know how many of those are spam accounts. I haven't really looked through them. But one way to tell that you're not a spam account is to say something in the comments. But oh, and I guess there's a little bell thing to click in. I consider YouTube a Google product, and I don't really get tremendously into that. I originally, when I started my vlog, also I said that I probably wasn't going to do much editing, but I've since found an editing tool that seems to be working, and it's staying true to my minimalism. I need to show you what my setup was like for yesterday's vlog that I did in my home. It's evolving, but it was very primitive, and I don't know, I'm kind of proud of how primitive it is, so maybe I'll do a vlog post about that if I run out of other topics. Alright, well, that's it for me. I'm gonna head into work. See y'all tomorrow.